The old ball and chain doesn't exist for a good chunk of young men today. But that freedom can feel crushingly heavy, because for all their complexities, healthy relationships and all the attendant obligations can be really enjoyable. It can be really good for us. Married men, on average, live longer, vote more, buy less booze, earn more money. So why are a growing number of teen boys and young men just foregoing romance altogether? What's the role of porn? And when it comes to masculinity and chivalry, what are girls really looking for? Dr. Cortney Warren is a clinical psychologist and clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at UNLV. She's the author of Letting Go of Your Ex and a sought-after therapist for young people trying to get their love lives off the ground. Dr. Cortney Warren, welcome to All Boy.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with some numbers. 63% of young men are single. 34% of young women are single, according to Pew Research in 2023. Does that sound right?
It sounds shockingly low to me, to be honest, but I think it is right. I think marriage rates are down. Dating experiences, even through adolescence, which historically is kind of the breeding ground for learning how to date,
right,
is down. So I think it's probably true.
You talked about adolescence. I have the number for that. 54% of young men, only 54% had a relationship at any point in their teen years, according to a study under AEI. And I started thinking through, what would you miss out on? I thought back to being 16 years old. And I worked at the bagel shop and then the telephone company. And I remember getting a check when I was 16, drove my old beater to the bank and cashed the check. And I thought, I'm going to take my little girlfriend out, which a lot has changed in my life. But at that time, it was a little girlfriend. And so that meant I had to ask her out, had to call her up, had to get the money, had to go to her house, pick her up. There were all these steps. It seems like you miss out on a lot if a teenager is not dating.
I think so. Because so much of dating is actually self-discovery. It's actually about you and many of the things you described. Practically how to pull it off, how to get the money, how to organize a restaurant reservation, what to wear, things that are really practical. But there's also this massive psychological component to dating. The self-esteem that it takes to ask someone out, to potentially be rejected, to have your heart broken, to face the scrutiny of your peers, right? There's so much learning in dating about who you are, who other people are, and what that experience is like for you, that I really am very concerned for teenagers who are not dating with other humans in person, because I think it probably does delay some of their psychological development in relationships.
Other people in person, you added that, why?
Because there's something really important about interpersonal relationships and social connectedness. You know, I think there's a tremendous amount of research suggesting that young people are spending most of their time using devices, phones, being online, being in social media. And while that can provide some sense of social connectedness and social support, it is a very different experience than actually sitting down face to face with another human and having to have a conversation, looking at nonverbals, looking at how do I connect with this person? How do I feel in this moment? How do they feel? Do I have empathy? Do I have a way of understanding them and connecting to them in the real world, in a physical body, in a physical form, that I think is incredibly important.
And as a 16-year-old sitting at TGI Fridays with a big ol' zit on your nose, not that I would remember that 25 years later, you do learn something about that of how do I conduct myself in this situation. Can I pick up on one more thing, though? I've had many parents and experts tell me there's a certain level of risk aversion among the current cohort of young people that they haven't seen before. And if you think of the jury of your peers, there is going to be, I mean, ideally, and I'll moralize here. You need at least one good breakup. The young people who get married to their person from middle school, I don't think that's a good idea usually. Also knowing that there's an embarrassment and disappointment with breakups, that can also be very good.
It's all learning. And the way that I think about it is adolescence is this very important but very difficult developmental phase for all of us. We all remember being a teenager. Seventh grade is kind of universally the worst time that people can think back.
I started homeschooling. It was horrible. Yeah.
Homeschooling, that's a whole nother element of seventh grade. But these middle school years into high school, hormones are shifting dramatically. Your physical body is changing. You're starting to differentiate yourself from your family dynamics and from yourself as a larger family group and opting for interactions with your peers and finding friends among your similar aged individuals become more and more important. It's also a time when you start realizing that you are a sexual being, that you have your first big crushes and potentially your first big breakup, as you mentioned, where you realize, oh, there's this dynamic. I am actually attracted to other people. I actually can have sexual experiences in ways that I haven't ever thought about before. And so this developmental stage that we call adolescence is a really, really formative one in terms of understanding yourself in your own social group that's similar aged and away from the security, let's say, of your family system, which is familiar, which is a part of you, but also hopefully, ideally, a safe and welcoming place to fall.
Yeah.
When you stunt that development by not having any romantic interactions or even peer relationships where you're trying to find yourself, you're saying, you know, I have a crush on this person. They may not like me, but I'm interested in them. I'm attracted to them. I'm thinking about them. I'd like to meet them. It requires a tremendous amount of risk to actually move forward with trying to date. And so, as you said, in that way, dating requires a lot of risk. You can have your heart broken. You can be rejected. You could get yourself into a relationship that's really positive and then decide, oh, this really isn't for me. And now I have to break their heart potentially. And then I have my social group of peers who all have an opinion about it. They have an opinion about what I look like and how I dress and what I say and how I do in school in terms of grades. Everybody's watching. And so it is a very risky time.
Yeah.
But as you said, it is really important to take risks, to recognize that you can get through them, to build some resiliency, to build some grit, and also to learn about yourself, what you like, who you are, where you're insecure, where you need help. Because you're not going to learn those things in a box intellectually thinking about them.
Right.
This is where experiential learning is critical. I can give you a book on romance and teens, or I could, tell you what the first heartbreak might feel like. But you're not going to fundamentally understand it unless you live through it. And in that way, life is meant to be lived. You have to be in it. You have to take risks and immerse yourself in your cultural context, in your community, in your world, because that's how you're going to learn the most.
My gosh, the significance of doing that really cannot be overstated. Yet when you describe that, I can really feel again why young people might be worried and think it's so much easier to stay home or be with my family or not drive or whatever. Now, as far as sexuality, it's a very good thing maybe that teens aren't having as much sex as early unwanted pregnancies, things like that. But male teen sexual activity fell by double digits in recent decades, according to AIBM. And, I think we all remember that I remember, what I thought about Paula Abdul, that was the beginning of so, that you have this awakening and you're thinking, who am I? What am I? What do I want? But if you never act on it at all, what's the effect of that later on?
I think for the first time in history that I am aware of, there are young people who are having pretty substantial sexual dysfunction in the sense that they're having difficulty sexually performing with other people their own age in their teens or 20s.
Like
We're
erectile
seeing-
dysfunction?
Yes.
Wow.
Even, young people requesting the little blue pill
Medicine.
or Cialis, some version of help because they're having a hard time having erections, having them maintained actually with another human. And part of that, I think, is very influenced by pornography. We are in this digital age where pornography is so accessible. It's very extreme, or can be, in terms of the content that young people are seeing at record rates, like historically unheard of. Even 30 years ago, if somebody was looking for pornography to be stimulated or because they were curious, they were looking for a magazine that may have had some naked pictures in it.
Yes, I remember being young and finding Victoria Principal in Playboy. That was a different age.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, by the end of high school, estimates are around 75% of teens have seen video-based pornography online, and probably at least half have found it by accident even. Even if you're a teen who doesn't really want to watch porn, there's a good chance you've come across it just by living on the internet, because a large chunk of content online is actually pornography, which many of
And
you may
Twitter
know,
is
but some
full
of
of
you
it
may not.
now. Like, you're just scrolling, and I'm like, where did all of this come from? Yeah.
Right. So then imagine being a teen who isn't dating as much, who is a little less risk taking, who's already insecure and nervous and has no experience with another human, and really not a lot of experience as a human being, as a sexual being on their own. And what's easier? Well, I can find all this porn online. And one of the really negative aspects of that is that it's very voyeuristic. You're not actually in the experience with another human, right? You're watching other humans, usually in a pretty extreme, sometimes very aggressive, very explicit way, with visual images that you would never have seen in the magazine that you found 30 years ago. And so in that sense, it can really stunt a person's growth in terms of understanding what real sexual behavior looks like in person with another person, what it means to give yourself sexually to another human and to also receive from them, to consider another person's needs or desires, to consider healthy body image. What do people look like? What does an erect penis really look like? Or what do young people's bodies look like?
Right.
So we're kind of setting teens up for a whole host of sexual problems, even when they start, even before they have any experiences. Because what they're learning about sex and sexuality and sexual behavior is really not at all representative of what it's going to be like when you go to Applebee's when you're 16 trying to have your first date. If you bring the pornography with you and you think that's what it's going to look like when you end up in the bedroom someday, when you agree to it, boy, it's going to be pretty rough.
Yes. And ideally, people are fulfilled by their sex lives eventually. And yeah, as you said, it kind of sets you up. The average age of exposure, I think, is 12. You're a clinical psychologist. What does that do to your brain at 12? Because your brain is not even, at 25, I think your brain is more formed for men, right? So what does that do to your brain?
It's such a flexible, malleable time of brain development, right? All through adolescence, your brain is still forming. It's making connections. It's learning and making connections between stimuli, basically. At 12, historically, people don't have any experience sexually. It's just the beginning. It's early adolescence. And so when you're exposed, we're talking middle school here for most people, to really explicit images, you are starting to learn things about yourself, about the world around you, and about sexual behavior that you probably believe to be true that really aren't. So, for example, one way that I see this coming out in the body image literature, I'm an eating disorder expert, is we have higher rates of cosmetic vaginal surgery requests than we've ever had in history. This is not postpartum vaginal reconstructive surgery
Like,
to fix
tighten up.
something that went wrong.
Yeah.
This is literally, I don't like my labial folds. Now, one of the reasons this is shocking to people like me is a lot of people listening might say, well, what is it supposed to look like? I don't even, what's the ideal?
Don't ask me.
Right? What's the ideal? But the reality is, since porn online, the expectation even of your genitalia has shifted
Has
as
to be
a
photogenic.
body image
Yeah.
concern. Where, oh, well, mine doesn't look right. It's not the right color. It's not the right shape. And so it really, from a young age, can start to be internalized. And what I mean by that is you become aware of a cultural norm, an appearance ideal, even if it's a sexual one, and you start to feel pressure to attain that ideal because that's what you should look like, or that's what's desirable. Or if you're going to then date someone, just like we are dissatisfied with our facial features or our hair or our muscularity, we are becoming dissatisfied with our sexual organs, our sexual selves. And the more that you feel pressure to be ideal, the more likely you are to internalize those ideals, thereby making them personally self-relevant and really making them your responsibility. So with the responsibility, because we live in a very individualistic culture that says you're responsible for what you look like. And if you don't look ideal, guess what? Here are a million products for you to try to fix it. Diets, surgeries, whatever. We're even amplifying an age group that already had pretty massive body image concerns, and including now sexually based body image issues.
If you
So I
talk about
think
the
it
perfect group to prey upon, you lay out all the reasons they are prime.
Prime. They're prime for it.
If either voluntarily or involuntarily, if young men are not sexually active, is being sexless, is it harmless? Is there another ramification? How do you think about that?
You know, I think that's such an interesting, provocative question. Is it okay to be asexual or to not date or to want to be single? I would say that certainly from a cultural perspective, being single historically is seen as quite negative. For women, you're the spinster, and for men, but a little less negative for men, perhaps, because you could be kind of the bachelor who has this fun, crazy life.
Yeah.
When I think about it, it's more about, is this an active choice that you're making as an adult because you'd like to have a single life? In which case I say, bravo, this is your life. You get to make your own choices based on who you are and what's fulfilling for you. When we think about it from an adolescent perspective, I think that it's quite risky because I think you're missing out on experiences that are really inherently necessary for you to understand yourself. And so I think for many of the people who have never had a date or are afraid of going on a date, probably it's the insecurity and fear that is stopping the experience and not the deliberate choice to say, I actually am just happier single, because it's really hard for me to believe that you're happier as a single person when you've never had any other experiences.
Right.
And so I think encouraging young people to take risks. I often tell anyone who asks me that dating is actually a big experiment. I don't want you to go into your dating thinking, oh, I have to find the one, or I have to impress them, or I have to make sure this works. I need a boyfriend or I need a girlfriend. This is totally an experiment to understand yourself and see what you learn about other people. And if you can go in it almost with a detached view of this is just going to be an experience for me to learn, it's much less risky because it psychologically costs you less if it doesn't go well. You can come out of it and say, well, gosh, that was really fun. I really like this and this and this. Or, oh, that was terrible. I don't ever want to do that again. This person was not for me, or I didn't like how I acted, or whatever it is. And so think of it as an experiment. It's part of your own learning. And embrace that as just another phase of life where you're trying to figure out who you are and who you want to be and who do you aspire to be. And this is the journey. This is the journey. We gather information, and every day we use that information to make choices for ourselves. Try to make choices that are helpful and not harmful.
It's great advice to take some of that pressure off, because I remember being there thinking, I want this to work so bad. I cannot start over again, but doesn't mean they're the right person for you or that you're the right person for them. Can I push on one thing, though, when you talked about, if someone has some experience later on, they're happy being alone. Part of mental health is time travel, and you think 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future, will this matter? I've known many people. I've never been able to pretend like I didn't care about a relationship, because I do. And I wanted to have a great marriage and family. That many people who said they didn't care and it wasn't so important, and maybe it wasn't at that very moment, eventually it is. Or am I wrong? You see people all the time. Are there genuinely people who say, I don't care. I'm 50 and I don't care?
Yeah, I would rephrase it a little bit. I think that social connections, feeling a sense of belonging, feeling vulnerable and intimate with other humans is essential for every human. There is a tremendous amount of research to suggest that feeling connected, feeling a part of a greater human community is most predictive of mental health and physical health, actually, than almost any other variable you can look at. That is a given. Whether or not someone really wants a marriage or a long-term romantic relationship or children, I think is a lot more variable. And so I guess that's how I would answer. I think that
you can tell me I'm wrong. That's fine.
Yeah. I know many people who are older single individuals who have really made the choice to be an older single individual and are very happy with that choice. They don't maybe like children. Maybe they don't want a family. They like their independence. They are very happy on their own. And so I guess as long as it's a choice and you're really deliberately and consciously making it, I think it is possible to be a happy single person. That said, it doesn't mean that you don't have social belonging in your life.
Connection is the key.
Yes.
Okay. That's a great point. If you're super involved in your church or a civic organization or a school, giving back in some way at a library, yeah, you do have a sense of meaning and connection and purpose and drive and obligation, which, yeah, I get that. Okay. So culturally, you counsel both young women and young men. Half of young men have not approached a woman in real life. Half. Do women want to be approached and asked out? A lot of young men are uncertain at this point.
It's such a gender role.
I know.
Bending time in so many ways culturally, I would say. Do people want to be asked out? Yes. Do women want to be asked out? Yes. Do men? Probably also. People want to feel important and attractive in general.
True.
And so I think that when thinking about young men here, when young men are attracted to someone and they're going through that perhaps butterfly phase where they're thinking about them, they're starting to have the more intense crush. They're thinking, I don't know if they like me, but I'm interested in this person.
Right.
I am going to be the advocate pretty much always of why not ask? What are the costs? Because if you can go through a situation in life and I can work with a teen and say, what are the long-term worst-case scenarios here? In a situation like this, usually the risks are very low. The worst thing they can think of generally is that they're going to say no.
And this is not the boss asking out the subordinate. This is peers. Yeah.
No. Talking about like the situation
Young
you brought
people.
up, teen boys who have never asked anyone out. Do the girls want to be asked out, or do the boys want to be asked out? Yes. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to like you back. And that's okay. Taking the risk and being authentically yourself is my hope. That's what I am always going to go back to for any teenager, especially here, who's starting the dating process. It's okay to feel insecure. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's even okay to be completely flat out rejected, because at some point in your life, it's very likely to happen. What I want is to build you up enough in your own skin that whatever comes your way, you know you can handle it. You know you're you. And you're still forming and you're still evolving and you don't know everything about yourself, that's for sure. But you know that being rejected doesn't actually affect your value as a human being. And building up the teenage self-esteem enough that they can handle the negativity and the rejection and the failure is really, really important to becoming a successful adult in relationships, in your career, in your family life.
When rejection is still hard, we should tell them, by the way. You know,
Yes.
like we're still in the process too. There is no destination. We're still doing it.
I
You
think
got to
one
get in
of the
some
most
reps.
common things that I say to humans is life is really hard. Life is actually really hard. You're going to go through so many things as a human being that are painful and difficult and unexpected that you're going to have to find a way to live through. The journey is not about cutting difficulty out of your life. That's inevitable. Change is inevitable. The journey is getting comfortable enough with who you are that you know you'll figure it out without letting it break you.
Yes. I remember this song, and it was a spiritual song, but it said something like, what would I do if I knew that I could not fail? And we know that we can fail, but sometimes you got to take that step that you would otherwise, you know, just borrow a little bit of that courage to go for it. Yeah. There's something floating around online when it comes to young men, and it was on that show Adolescence on Netflix, which is this 80-20 rule that 80% of women only want to be with 20% of men, which I'm not sure why that is such a big deal, because I think 80% of men probably like 2% of women. So I don't know why that's so bad, but is that true?
I don't know those data, so I don't know that I can confirm or deny that. Generally speaking, my guess is that they are looking at a very specific subset of men that women find attractive. And that would probably be very different than if you ask them questions about who they would like to be in a long-term relationship with. So sexual attraction is very different than general romantic choices, for example.
Can I say that, Courtney? Another way is that this has to do with the apps, I think. And yes, it's true. Some people are more physically attractive, but a lot of women who I know, and again, this is generalizing, they like a man with a little bit of pudge. They don't mind that. Now, is that what they're going to be drawn to on the app? Maybe not. They love someone who is dependable, who is funny, who has, you have to signal resources, which I guess you can do in some ways physically. That there are a lot of attributes that get lost if you're just looking at a picture.
No question. If you're just looking at a picture, you're really just looking at sexual attraction. How much do you think this person is sexually attractive?
Yeah, your jawline. Yeah.
Your jawline, which is another problem with online dating and sort of online images that people see, especially, again, I'm keeping going back to teens because I know we're focused on young people here in your podcast. But when you think about sexual attractiveness, whether you think somebody is physically good looking, that is not enough to make a relationship work, which all of us know. It's not even a necessary condition of making a relationship work for a lot of people. And part of the experience of dating from 12 on, from an early age, is trying to figure out what you're actually attracted to in a human being. What values do you have? What do you really admire in other people? What do you really like in a dating partner? Maybe you care a lot that they're really smart. Well, you're not going to see that on a picture. Maybe you care that they're very kind-hearted or that they make an effort to communicate with you. There are so many things that are required for a relationship to work for most people, most adults certainly, that have nothing to do with what a person looks like. And if you're just looking at images of physical people and you think that's going to translate into who you're going to date or how satisfied you're going to be in a longer term romantic relationship, you're going to be very disappointed.
And that's the looking part. If you're the presenting part, what do you tell your clients when they're asking, how do I show people what's in here? How do I show people that I have so much to give?
Yeah. Well, authenticity is so attractive for most humans, actually, which is really just this being secure in your own skin, understanding who you are and living according to your values, your personality, your way of being in the world, no matter what situation you encounter. So someone who's really authentic is very similar in their romantic relationships as they are in their friendships, as they are at work, as they are in school. And that is attractive because you will trust that person.
Yes.
It is inherently trustworthy when you say, oh, well, Cortney claims to believe that all humans are of equal value. And so when she's at work or when she's at home or when she's at school as a parent, she shows up with that belief evident in what she says and how she acts, right? And so when it comes to dating, I will always start with be yourself. Be as much of yourself as possible. Because if you're putting on a front to just try to show the best aspects of yourself, it's very likely that you're not going to be a great match with whomever you're dating in the long run. Because they're not getting to see the real you. That's not to say that you don't want to put your best foot forward when you start dating. Of course people do. They want to look their best. They want to be their best. They want to show that they have all this wonderful stuff inside of them.
And let your weirdness out,
great.
let your silliness out, your weirdness out a little bit, because I'm very weird. But you got to let that slip out a little bit at a time.
Yes. If you're into Dungeons and Dragons and the person across the table from you says, well, that's weird, you can say, oh, I understand. For a lot of people, it's weird, but I love it. Don't try to downplay who you really are or what you really like or how you exist in the world for another person. It's going to make it very hard for you to connect, because then when you let a little bit of your weirdness, your eccentricity out, even your insecurities out, you're actually becoming more vulnerable. It's the risk. It goes back to the risk that we were talking about earlier, where there's more risk that you're going to be rejected or judged, but there's also a greater reward that someone is actually going to see you and who you are and potentially really like that. And it's actually through vulnerability that we connect. So, there's a lot of talk in the media and in research right now on loneliness. That so many Americans are lonely. They say they're lonely. They report that they're lonely. That doesn't mean that they're alone. You can be alone in the world and not be lonely. The aloneness comes from a lack of connection and vulnerability. And it requires getting under the nails and showing some of the heartache, some of the difficulty, some of the insecurity, some of the realness, because it's through sharing that we connect with people. And so don't forget that when you start dating. Don't forget to try to be yourself and share some. And if someone rejects you, it actually probably means they're not a very good fit for you anyway.
Right, right. And if you shove down or dismiss every part of you that maybe doesn't seem like what the other person wants, eventually, even if it's 5 years from now, you will be resentful and you'll think, why did I do that? And you got everything you thought you wanted, and then not a good idea. Real quick, culturally, toxic masculinity, we've been chewing on that and regurgitating and then doing it all over again. There seems to be a consensus that went too far. Now, I don't know about in the literature because you're also a scholar, but what about chivalry? Do most women like chivalry?
Oh, I think that's such an interesting question. And I can't say that I know any data on chivalry, which is kind of a pop term, I would say. I think even in the research literature, I'm thinking of Jonathan Haidt and his book Anxious Generation, which is really kind of popular and has been, where for many young boys, there has been an effort to make them less aggressive, less active, less busy, that has harmed some of sort of the old way of thinking about how boys are, that they run around, that they hit each other sometimes, that they play on the playground.
A lot of them do.
Right?
Mine do.
They can be aggressive. And even from the time of Freud, for anyone who likes psychology, he talked about defense mechanisms to rein in some of those aggressive desires. He would argue that we all have aggressive desires and boys have more aggressive desires. And when they have those aggressive desires, society's job is in part to try to channel them into an arena that's actually kind of positive or at least not super harmful. So get them in sports where they can hit each other and get them into activities, even in the local playground where they're chasing and tackling, because trying to make them not have those tendencies is almost like stifling a biological and psychological disposition that you can't whack out of them. We can try to help them. They didn't choose. Right, that they didn't choose. That isn't so much like, oh, I don't want to be aggressive. There's a reason that people do extreme sports. There's a reason that kids run around a lot, that they have a lot of energy. And so I think in many ways, giving outlets that are helpful but still can provide an outlet for understanding yourself as a busy, aggressive being is really important. And thinking that we can make children always be rational and kind of emotionally intuitive and even intelligent is a very faulty expectation. And so the more that we can encourage healthy ways of being busy and aggressive, I think probably the better off in the long run, because you have to have some outlets to feel passionate and to feel angry and to feel all the big feelings that really exist in us as humans, while still trying to curtail the, stealing and breaking into buildings and doing things that are in the long run going to be very harmful for you and us as a society.
Absolutely. Antisocial behavior, never good. As far as chivalry, though, a lot of women I know, and I think 40% of college-educated women are the primary breadwinners for their families. A lot of the really accomplished women I know still say, I want my husband to be a man. And I know that maybe that's not a popular thing to say, but that's how they feel if you really give them some truth serum. And they say, I want the door opened. I want him to pay for the meal. Is that true generally? And not every case, but generally?
Yeah. Gosh, I have such a hard time answering that question.
Sorry.
Because people are so different, to be honest. And culturally, people are very different as well. Some women are offended by that kind of as an expectation of, well, I can open it myself or I can pay for myself. And I think that's one of the longer term consequences of feminism, which in many ways, I consider myself feminist. I think the equality of men and women, or really of anyone on any demographic feature, is the central tenet of feminism. That said, I think that our gender roles have become mixed in some ways that lend itself to not being as chivalrous or not being as, what many women would say, romantic. Bring me flowers, take me out to dinner, make an effort to make me feel important and special. And that your job in some ways as my partner is to do things that fill my bucket, do things that feel good. And even, way back when men are from Mars, women are from Venus. People have been talking about these ideals and these sort of culturally enforced values for a very long time. I think the crux of it is understand who you are and understand who your partner is. What can you do to make them feel important and special? And what do they not like? And the goal of a healthy romantic relationship is really to be able to provide that for each other in meaningful ways. I think I'm hard pressed to say that most humans wouldn't really like to get a box of chocolates or some flowers or a surprise dinner or opening the door. I think it's very nice.
Yeah. I want someone to do the laundry, but that's what I want.
Yes.
To each his own. Yes. Know your partner and know thyself. It's good. It's good advice. Let's finish here. Big picture, if we could, Cortney. As we're seeing fewer young people date, have sex, have long-term relationships, if we get to the point where we don't have families being formed and marriage rates are down, how does that affect all of us as a culture, as a society?
That's a question that we're going to be really trying to unpack in data and in cultural observations for decades to come, I would think, because we also have declining birth rates.
Yes.
There are so many shifts that we're seeing in the world that are somewhat unprecedented in terms of adolescents not being interested in having sex with another person, to not procreating at the same rates, to having declining populations, to having people choosing not to get married or not to have a long-term romantic partner. I'm not fully sure what this is going to mean for us as a cultural community.
Yeah.
I do think that having romantic experiences and understanding that we are sexual and romantic beings is a part of the human condition. We are biologically driven to have sex. We are biologically driven to procreate, whether you choose to or not, or whether you're even attracted to an opposite sex person or not. From an evolutionary perspective, that's true. And when we're deliberately making choices that fly in the face of that, where people are saying, I don't know if I want to get married. I don't know if I want to have children. I don't know if I even want to have sex. It's shifting, I think, kind of the landscape of humanity, of what do you want and how much are you separating yourself from yourself as an animal, as a biological being, in place of perhaps a higher order intellectual being who makes choices based on reason and sort of well thought out desire, thereby suppressing some of our tendencies that are much more animalistic and biological that in the past we didn't have any choice around, because until birth control, it wasn't really much of a choice, or until even modern laws around marriage or around
Consent.
long-term relationships with consent that didn't play a role at all. So I'm really not sure what's going to happen, but I think, what do you think?
I totally agree with you that it feels like we're stepping into uncharted territory where desires and priorities and lives look a lot different than they used to. And I have no clue what we're headed for. I don't. I think actually there could be, and I've talked about this with religion and some other issues, I think there could be something of a return to traditionalism. And that doesn't mean that we wipe out all the families like mine or anything like that. But I just mean that a lot of people are going to be thinking, well, maybe my grandma didn't have it all wrong. And let me see the pieces of it that really do work. And let's reclaim those. That's my hunch. I don't know.
I hope that that's true. I think there are a lot of benefits to marriage, even if you're not religious, or to having a committed long-term relationship that aren't necessarily evident when you're young, even when you're getting married, or even when you're in a long-term relationship. You may not understand why this could be very beneficial for you. So one of the main reasons that long-term marriages can be so healthy is that it really makes people stick together through the really tough times that if they were not married, they would leave. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't leave at some point, and it doesn't mean that all marriages are healthy, but it is to say that it probably psychologically pushes us to stick with it and explore and compromise and try to understand ourselves and our partners in ways that if you were not committed, you would just tap out. It's a bit of the risk aversion thing. You'd say, this is too hard. I'm out. I'm done. I'm not doing this. And that does come with a cost sometimes, because the way to grow and change as a human is to be uncomfortable. We're very unlikely to change when we're comfortable. We just stay with the status quo. It's pretty easy. The main reason people come into therapy is not because their life is going so well.
Right. I'm tired of winning.
Right? Everything's great. I just wanted to come tell you about it. They're coming in because it's so painful or miserable or uncomfortable that they can't afford to stay the same. Something has to change. And actually, it's our relationships usually, especially romantic relationships and family relationships, that force us into positions where we care enough to say, I am so uncomfortable that I have to change something, and I actually have to do it in this context with this other person. There's a lot of value in that from my perspective, from a psychological perspective.
Absolutely. Okay, then let's wrap it up here, because if someone heard you and said, all right, you convinced me, Cortney, I'm going to go for it. Your very best, quick, asking someone out advice?
Think about who you are, what you really want, what's the goal, and how can you communicate that to the other person that makes them feel seen and appreciated and important.
Oh, so I'm not just telling you how I feel. I also want to think about how you are feeling.
Yes. What can I say that might make them really think twice before they say no? Right? Because the goal is to have the experience. So maybe you say something nice about them, not just their appearance, something else if possible. I met you and I've been thinking about you because there's something really compelling about the way that you talk. Or I heard you say this in class. You were answering the teacher's question and I was really interested in how you thought about that. And I'd love to get to know you better. Can I take you out sometime? What would be fun for you? I'll take you anywhere you want. We can go to have a coffee. We can go bowling. We can go for a walk. Light
TGI Fridays.
TGI Fridays. Yeah.
We have trod so much ground here, but really it all gets back to connection, putting yourself out there, vulnerability. The thing we want in other people is what we have to also give out to the world. Really terrific advice and insight. Dr. Cortney Warren, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I wish everyone the best out there. Go take some risks.
There you go. Relationships are always a messy issue. Add in all these other factors, it is a lot. But finding connection is fundamental to happiness for most of us and to a healthy society. So where would you start? Do you agree? Do you disagree with what Dr. Warren and I had to say? Leave a comment below. Let me know the truth. Let's start a conversation here. Subscribe to All Boy on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. The website is allboyallgood.com. I'm Chance Seals. See you soon.